We are so happy to have you joining us today, whether that's live or you're listening on a recording later on. This is kind of a dream that Faik and I have had for a while, that we would be able to share our journey in this coaching process. So we're really happy to have all of you here joining us. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I work for Summit Center, and I am an ed therapist and a coach. And prior to doing this work, which I've been doing for about 12 years, I was a public school teacher for 25 years. And during that time, I earned a doctorate in education. And that dissertation was actually on coaching. And I was thinking, my husband, who played football at UCLA, he had great coaches who were helping him be a great athlete. And one of my favorite coaches, Coach Wooden at UCLA, was a basketball coach who was an amazing man as well, and created the pyramid of success. And it kept staying in my mind about the role of coaches. And I was wondering why it was that teachers, such an important profession, rarely received coaching. It was usually an administrator would come in, sit in judgment of their ability to teach. And I felt as though coaching was a real missed opportunity. And so what I did was I put a student teacher in their final phase of student teaching in the same classroom with someone just learning to be a teacher. And I taught them how to coach each other. And then another way I used coaching was I ran a literacy lab at my elementary school, where I trained children to coach each other in the basics of learning to read. And so coaching has just been a natural and important part of my life that extends to the work I do now. And as Faik reminded me, today, February, the 12th day of February at 12 o'clock is also our 12th anniversary of having met each other. So I would like to introduce my former client and friend, Faik.
Thank you so much, Paula, for the lovely introduction, and to Summit Center for putting this together. You know, when you approached me about it, I was actually really excited, in the sense that the timing, you know, it's felt like it was meant to be. And also because really I was hoping that whoever is listening, you know, we don't know who, you know, I don't know who will be listening to this, either live or recorded. And if in some way our conversation, they can get some kind of insight, some kind of an understanding or an idea, or even a hint on how they can navigate their own journey. And we'll be talking about that in a little bit more detail. So, but just as an introduction, and so my name is Faik Bouhrik. I'm originally from Algeria. I grew up there. I came to the US for college. I really wanted to become an astronomer, and I just sort of, based on a hunch and intuition. At the time, the internet just started, and so it actually, right before it did, so it sort of took a guess. I knew NASA could help me with some information, didn't have their address, sent them a letter randomly, based totally on intuition. And I think that's intuition. I mean, that intuition in its power and significance is extremely important. And long story short, I found myself in the US attending a school I never heard about before, just a little bit, like a year down the road or so. So yeah, and then I came to the US, and the first decade was incredibly hard because I was just trying to make sense of so much. So there are things I did not even understand at the time. So of course there is the map, the career. Okay, so here I am. I just got a scholarship from an Ivy League school, and it's felt on the external that I had the world sort of in my hands. But deep down, I think because of my predispositions, including the sort of like, I think so you could see a hint in it already by just taking a path that nobody took, at least in my peers or people around me, independence of mind and of excitability and intensity and all of those things. So those sort of, they have their own demands and logic, and there is the external logic on how we go through cycles of life. You do this, you do this, you do that. And it was incredibly hard to navigate. And eventually it actually led me to a crisis where how I was living externally and how I was pressured, or how sort of like compelled from the inside to live, that just did not make sense. They weren't the same thing. It's like you were told a story in two different languages, and they just really had so little to do with each other. And like in the understanding and experience, it was incredibly hard. So then I, in fact, was dropped out of college initially. It was incredibly hard, as I said, to navigate all of that. And plus, post 9/11 US, I just arrived actually 3 weeks after that. So dealing with the complexity, all those complexities, I just dropped out initially. And then I went back, and that's when I met Paula. When I went back, I was at my early 30s, and I knew, I really wanted to do this. I'm more than capable of doing it, and it's just that the timing initially just wasn't right. It was so right in the sense that the way it worked, but it wasn't psychologically and spiritually. And I started to realize that a lot of whatever felt, it felt to me like this sort of chronic misalignment with the world. There was just really this chronic misalignment with the world. And I just could put my fingers in it. Something to do with spirituality and sensitivity, emotional sensitivity and spirituality. And there was a point where I just did not have enough expertise to even understand it, sort of vaguely started to navigate, by reading, by reflecting, but then I just felt at that point that I really needed somebody who sort of understood, at the very least, somebody who had an understanding and could explain to me what was happening, or at least help me understand all of that. And that's how I looked up. I went to Google and I just said spiritual emotional sensitivity coach. And Paula was one of the very first people, and I'm so incredibly happy that it happened. And I remember you sending you an email just telling you that I'm looking for an ally. And then we started the conversation, and then I became your client, and eventually we became friends. So, yeah.
And Faik, you didn't mention English wasn't one of the languages that you spoke as a child, which made, all of this more difficult.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, it wasn't. Yeah. Yes.
So when you first came to speak with me and you were looking in the direction of sensitivities and spirituality, it was clear to me right away that you were profoundly gifted. And I remember our conversations about this because you really felt like you were pushing back on me about this thing, gifted, and it seemed to you like almost an elitist kind of thing. Can you remember back to, that questioning? I had to go a little bit softly with that at first, but how you first felt hearing about your giftedness and maybe how that's changed over time?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Ultimately, it comes down to cognitive. So it's a cognitive thing, and ultimately to the cognitive wiring. At the time when I hear people talking about giftedness, and it was mostly, so it was around me. So I had a very negative image about it because it was mostly achievement oriented and people just achieving things. But to me, I looked at it, and then so the people that were around me, they weren't in any way emotionally, spiritually sensitive. It wasn't above the dimensions where I felt somebody could be truly unique as a human being, or defined as human. It was more about achievements, and it was more this competition thing. And it was pretty cutthroat. I mean, as I said, like when I went to Cornell, saw some incredibly competitive students. I mean, they could do math very well and all of that. But so it really turned me off. That's this whole thing. It was like a pageant contest. That's what it was. And so it really, I was just really sort of saw it quite negatively. So then when you told me that about myself, I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Because when I look back, I mean, even if in terms of achievement, like for example, the English one is perfect example. I mean, when I applied, so when I sent that letter, NASA sent me the information. I didn't even know what an SAT was, what an SAT was, what a TOEFL was. Then I had to learn, like, I have to find ways to learn mathematics. Now I have to learn it now in English, take the exams, take the English writing, and then end up, like, for example, in the writing exam that was for native speakers, I got, I think, like 98 percentile or something. And that's how I ended up getting the scholarship. So it's clearly there are sort of these glimpses where I could do things, where somebody could point you and say, okay, you did this and you did this. That's just clearly there was something somebody could fairly say that's a gifted, but not to me. To me, that's just, so it was like kind of survival. I just had to do it. And there are times, and also my relationship with school was incredibly paradoxical. It was really paradoxical. This like push-pull. Where sometimes I get really excited and I do extremely well. And there are times I don't even show up for 6 months in high school and middle school. And particularly middle school, I think there's a year, 9th grade, I didn't show up for 6 months. I really hated it. Just that sort of, so I never associated myself with that term at all, and I never thought. When you told me, I just remember just feeling a little bit strange about the whole thing.
And your experiences in school, besides, you know, skipping quite a bit of school because it wasn't providing the learning that you needed, you experienced some difficult abuse at school.
It was very, so it changed quite a bit. So, like, for example, if I look back, so now, like, for example, I grew up in Algeria, certain things in school that happened back then, they're illegal now. Like, they are illegal. But back in the time, it's just considered normal. It's just like first generation sort of after independence. It's the country finding its way in the dark. And school was really about discipline. So school was really about, it's all about discipline. And it's about, so you remember, I always come back to that theme that I'm very convinced now of this. Even here in the United States, schools really are about the nation state. If they really, there are two things they are meant to do. Efficient workers in factories and soldiers. People, you tell them go die in that battle because it's good for the state, and you don't want somebody to think too much about it. So these are the two things. Now you bring in, talking about people that have that cognitively little bit intense, and then you put them into that environment. It's exactly the wrong types of people. Yet they are the right people in the sense that they can excel in terms of learning and creativity and all of that. But it isn't really about that. So that creates an immense source of tension, and let alone doing it in a developed country back in the day, just sort of starting to find its way, and that adds layers and layers of complexity.
So it seemed really important for you to find a coach, because a lot of other people, and a coach who understood giftedness and Dabrowski and overexcitabilities, because it became a frame for you understanding yourself. So one of the things that we talked about early on is about diagnosis and misdiagnosis of gifted people, and what happens when people don't understand your intensity, whether it's intellectual intensity. And I know we're trying to hold ourselves back a little bit today so we don't get too wild with our overexcitabilities, but also emotional overexcitability, some of the sensual. And we've had a chance through our working together for you to understand that. So how do you think your understanding of your overexcitabilities has impacted your life?
Very profoundly. I have to tell you that, you know, Paul, I have to tell you, like I told you privately, I'm going to say it publicly. If I didn't meet you and work with you, I'm not so sure I'd be alive today, and I have no idea. It's quite unlikely. And I will tell you why. It's really simple now that I look back at it. So for me, I always argued that calling humans Homo sapiens, they're not, I mean, anything about wise. Humans are Homo mythicus, really. That's what I think the name should be. Myth is so fundamental to our being. So now we have this sort of multi-layered mythical structure. For me, the mythical, the individual one, the collective, they all broke down. And I found myself at a point like this Homo mythicus thing without a myth, because clearly the myths that I based my life on, they all broke down. And it's almost like you're sitting on standing on very thin ice in very cold ocean, and the ice just breaks down, and there is nothing else you can latch to. That's exactly where it was. It really, it was as simple as that. So then just understanding the central issue really is in terms of coming to terms with one's cognitive predispositions, orienting oneself in the world, and then trying to live from that place. Because the demands are, then they still are today, to live a certain way. That external pressure is always going to be there. But then if there is no, but if the internal pressure to sort of balance it isn't there, well, because you can provide it. Whatever you had is actually an external thing, and you internalize, now it broke down. It's extremely it could be extremely difficult. And but here's the thing. Then we have a medical system. We have things in place. So when you throw a fish, when you throw a net, and you want to catch fish, inevitably, if you throw it in the ocean, you end up with a dolphin. You end up with a whale, you end up with anything. But then you would say, well, that's not a fish. Clearly, it's not a fish. Oh, no, it's a fish because by definition, fish is whatever we catch in the net. And you say, no, fish is by definition a fish. That thing, just because you catch it in the net, isn't a fish. But that's exactly what had happened. And the psychology/psychiatry establishment is, well, now we throw in the fact that it's highly commercialized, profit-driven. With America, like as a modern society, doesn't have the patience that more quote unquote primitive societies had when people go through these kinds of journeys and transformations. People saw them as something incredibly beneficial to the person as well as to the society. We don't have that kind of patience. We have to just suppress it, turn the person to a client, a lifetime client. So what I'm trying to say is, there is that thing that is just related to humans, and it happens everywhere. But then now we throw the complexity of, like for example, in my case, was somebody living in a foreign country trying to adapt in a time that wasn't necessarily very easy. Now you throw in the whatever the wisdom structures, societal, so where they define them. You throw all that on top of the whole situation, and the whole thing becomes extremely hard thing to navigate. So it takes a little bit of time, it takes a little bit of empathy and compassion from somebody like you, and self also, and understanding, to be able to actually even understand it and trying to come up with a map to try to navigate out of it, because it doesn't exist. And the map still doesn't exist. I'm going to create a map for myself, and then I could maybe share some insight to somebody who's going through something parallel. But they have to figure it out on their own as well. So when that's the thing, is that anything that happened. So we're talking about the misdiagnosis. These are just more complexities that are going to even suppress the original issue, and sometimes completely miss the mark and add to the suffering and make that crisis even more acute. So.
And I think that conversation about the intensities and anxiety and depression and all that gifted, let alone profoundly gifted people and people with overexcitabilities experience, our looking at Dabrowski together and positive disintegration, it was clear that Dabrowski felt that the overexcitabilities increased depression, increased anxiety, and that they were necessary for us to move up into higher values. Our feelings of, questioning, why did I do something? The feelings of guilt are because you have these values calling you and questioning how you're behaving. And so Dabrowski was really big on self-psychology with a coach helping you along the way. And I've really seen that happen for you, Faik. I would just like to share with the people who are listening that we've probably both seen this rise, your multipotentiality, where you didn't talk yet about being an entrepreneur and creating this app, Vegius, and the screenplay you're writing about giftedness, as well as, you know, the research you're doing on merging galaxy clusters, they all have to do with what you and I have been talking about, the difference between transactional and transformational giftedness, which has come about in the last few years, that many gifted people in school are being taught, like, be transactional. You work hard, you'll get good grades. You get good grades, you'll get a scholarship. You'll get to law school or med school or whatever. And it's all about do this and you will be rewarded. And the transformational giftedness really is, how do you transform yourself? How do you work your way up Dabrowski so that you're doing things for the good of humankind, and the good, like you're doing also for animals and you know, for the earth. So before we get into more of that, I just want to see, Elizabeth, are there possibly any questions that have been posed already that we might be able to answer? We're considering answering questions along the way rather than waiting till the very end.
There's nothing in the chat right now, but people certainly, if they have questions, put them in. And I actually had a little question myself. I don't know what the knowledge level is of our audience, but you've mentioned Dabrowski a few times. Could you maybe just explain that a little bit more? And what does it mean when you're working your way up Dabrowski, like you just said?
Okay, and it's interesting, Faik, I'll let Faik give his view afterward about Dabrowski, because he'd like to see some of it tweaked a little bit even. But Dabrowski was a Polish psychiatrist who died in 1980. And in working with clients who had some kind of psychiatric issues, he noticed that maybe as many as 60% of people are at what he called level 1. And that's where you're really focused on yourself. I'm going to do this because it'll be good for me, or I'm going to do it because that's what my boss is telling me to do. Even if it seems like maybe it's not right to you, you're willing to give up your beliefs for, like, to fit in with society. And on the other end is the 5th level, which is really the ones that people talk about, you know, Gandhi, Eleanor Roosevelt, people who everything they're doing is for the good of humankind, and it is not a self-centeredness. And then in between you have levels 2, 3, 4. And what happens is that you can have what's called a positive disintegration, meaning that you move up in your value system more and more, caring about other people as well as yourself. Or you can fall back down. So you could have someone who was moving from a level 2 to a little bit higher level 3, and then find themselves in a situation where they're going to give up their beliefs for, you know, to make more money, or they may be creating a product that actually does people harm, but it's okay. They're going to do it because of, again, the amount of money that they're going to make. And so with Dabrowski, he was saying that it's really our struggles, our emotional struggles, the feeling of dissonance between seeing I could be doing better, I could be a better person, but no, you know, I'm not going to, you fall back, or struggle with it enough that you pull yourself forward. So if I can talk to Faik for a moment about this, now that you understand, Faik, in our conversations and in your lived life, how knowing about Dabrowski has moved you forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then what I just want to add to what Paula said is, for Bouhrik, there are certain things that, particularly this psychiatric sort of breakdown that sees in individuals, not all the time, but sometimes. Sometimes it is. I'm seeing some questions coming. I'm really excited to answer them. But but sometimes it's extremely important. It's actually a positive sign. It's not a negative sign. The person is breaking down. And to me, what I was saying initially, that there is that initial adjustment, and that breaks down. The more so, but I think there is something really central to his theory, which is overexcitability, spiritual, emotional, intellectual. The more a person possesses of those, the more likely they're going to break down. And then there is this opportunity to rise to sort of to higher levels. Most of the time, people are going to actually fail. So to reach level 5 is extremely, extremely hard, because the people become less and less numerous, less and less. There is less and less knowledge and guidance in terms of what to do. So you know what to do when there is a structure, or you do this, even if it's a horrible structure, but there is a structure. Like you pick up a gun, you go fight, you could do this, you do that, you go to the factory, you do this, you do this, you fall in love, you marry, you do this. Not that I'm dismissing fall in love or anything, but I'm just saying when it becomes part of sort of a structure. So you have a structure, regardless of some elements of it can be some very uplifting, some of it aren't. But then that overexcitability gives a very high potential for autonomy. And then when autonomy happens, then the breakdown could happen. And then Bouhrik sees it as potential growth. In fact, if you look very carefully, story of Buddha. So somebody might say Buddha, Christ, Muhammad, Moses, Gandhi. Well, Gandhi is more recent. So people say, well, those stories are highly mythologized, so we can't use them as examples. No, but on an archetypal level, people understood that. Like for example, look at the story of Buddha, married, living a certain kind of life. He's a prince. Him asking questions all the time, that shows the overexcitability, and shows the intensity, it shows all the qualities that Bouhrik says about. And then he ends up going very, very deep. He breaks down and then he goes up. And the second Buddha that we have is the Buddha of the Nirvana under the tree. And to me, I think that's really an archetypal story, in the sense that we understand this process. So Bouhrik put it more in psychology language, but that was understood for a very long time. I mean, throughout the world. And to me, that what gives it a lot of credibility is the fact that it is a universal thing. So we're dealing with something universal on how humans change and evolve. And this idea of the linear, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, and then does not work that way. So it could be for most people. And then I also want to add one more thing. So Paula said about modifying it. I was just telling Paula that we're thinking about maybe we could rewrite the theory in the sense, like if I ask a question, what does somebody, let's just use that very extreme example, what does Adolf Hitler fall into this? So because you have one and then you go up. Actually, I think disintegration does not necessarily make people go up. Sometimes it makes them go down. And then as you have extreme cases of people raising all the way to number, so Bouhrik has it from 1 to 3 to 5. So I was suggesting Paula, it could actually, you bring in the basis at 0. Most people are between -1 and 1, somewhere in here. And then you could go up, you could go down. And in fact, even in terms of a distribution, if you put it and you graph it, it actually looks like a bell curve once you finish both the negative as well as the positive. And then it will allow for people adapting, but not always in the positive, beneficial way. Sometimes people go the opposite direction, maybe even equally frequently. But that's a discussion for another day.
So people who are watching just had a chance to hear a mathematician's view about Bouhrik and how we need to have minuses, as well as something when I first met Faik I was aware of, and that's that amazing visual spatial ability, which we won't get into quite yet. Maybe we'll have time to talk about. Faik wasn't even aware of this amazing visual spatial ability because he just assumed everybody thought in that way as well. But Elizabeth, it looks like some people have posted questions. If you would like to share one with us.
Yeah, so I'd just like to announce to everybody that unfortunately, chat is not working, even though it looks like it is to me. So we are using the Q&A feature today. And if you just look in the lower right corner of your screen, you should see a little icon that is a triangle, square, and circle. That's called the activities icon. You click on that, and then you should see a list of options. Click on Q&A. And then in that Q&A window, we can basically just use it like a chat. You can type in comments, questions, whatever you want. We're going to use that as a chat today.
Okay.
So, and thank you to everybody who already found that feature. Eric Larson made a comment. He said, I have long observed that physicists, from subatomic to cosmological, often seem to be the most spiritual of all scientists. This makes sense to me, at least. I appreciate getting to hear from one in person. So thank you for that comment.
I would like, could we have a follow-up to that for a moment, and then I'll
Yes.
come back to you, Elizabeth. This is what I was hoping we could do, is take one and then lead it forward. So even though Faik and I really started getting into giftedness and Dabrowski and overexcitability, and that, overlaying that was his very strong questioning about spirituality. And so simultaneously, we were dealing with that. And Faik, do you want to tell us a bit about how your understanding of your giftedness and your spirituality have impacted you personally as well as professionally?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what it is that it's more than an intellectual understanding. It's really, again, like accepting something that was already there, in the sense that so there is a sort of sense of oneness, like sense that things aren't as divided, or at a fundamental level they're not as divided as they actually look like. So, and then you could come to that from different angles, like, for example, physics, cosmology, physics, it's all energies. At the end of the day, it's all conservation of energy. So just energy, whatever it is, changes its form, but ultimately there's some, I mean, and I think back at the time, Newton, and back in the medieval times, they called it the living force. So it's they really believed there was something animated in the universe. And I think that is much more wholesome and uplifting and accurate view than the ones that are more dry ones that we have today. But also in terms of, so when they allowed, so this understanding in terms of teaching, to be able to understand students, their needs, how I can guide them, how I can support them. And in fact, so Laura asking, I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about your work with animals and nature. This is a perfect example. So I created a platform, I called it Veggies, and connected. So because I saw animal sanctuaries struggling for donations. So then what I said is that, okay, what I can do is create this platform and make sanctuaries partners, honorary partners, meaning that they automatically receive 50% of the revenue. Some people think, well, that's kind of crazy, it's unpractical. But we will see. There is sort of like, even business-wise and strategic-wise, there is a paradox. If managed well, it can actually work really, really well. But ultimately, really, to me, it just felt the right thing. So somebody feel, and these are mostly, I mean, there's sanctuaries, mostly women, very high levels of empathy. And so population, I felt really compelled to sort of, and moved by, and the kind of very important work they did. So I wanted to help them. And so came up with this idea. And again, so that came up from different parts. So thinking in terms of numbers, but ultimately and fundamentally, it really is a spiritual just sentiment. I just felt that we could create something more wholesome, something that's more equitable. So it's based on this idea of income. I mean, 50% of the revenue goes to sanctuaries. And the second pillar is we add in a tracker where people will be able to see where every penny goes. So making it very, very transparent, some sort of almost opposite to what companies are supposed to do, in the sense that, okay, we chose to make it very transparent. And the third one now I came up with, this is anti-marketing, in the sense that get rid of marketing and influencers. The more I talk to people, that has a lot to do with Dabrowski, because I see And there are times where people think to show that somebody sort of higher in, they don't necessarily use Dr. Bouhrik, but something similar, is if you have a nice short story and then you could say the right phrases and then you self-promote, then okay, then you're a great person. The more I get to talk with people, the more I realized it probably is people don't have enough self-awareness to really understand what they are in terms of values and where they stand. And they may be confused about themselves, but I cannot afford to be confused. I have to come up with a strategy that actually works. And that's why I ditched this marketing entirely and came up with something called anti-marketing. It's not, I didn't invent the term, but the particular details about how I'm going to go about creating a community to make this happen would be something quite counterintuitive. Exactly what marketing does, I'm going to flip it, and exactly because I'm flipping it again, so that creates gives us leverage. So I may get a little excited, not all over the place, but I think it's relevant now. But it really is, because all of these things are just examples how something you come up with sort of very feeling that, like for example, for me, animals deserve empathy. People deserve empathy. But then how do I turn these into programs that could actually make a difference? Then you bring in, then I have to lean in on other things, including my long life experience of having to think out of the box, perseverance, and try to leverage as much as I can to try to be of service, because I'm completely convinced that that is something that I deeply want to do. So,
okay, Elizabeth.
Yes, we
Another
do.
question?
We have questions flowing in. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And I'm going to try to give you a couple of them at once, but
Okay.
A good one that I was wondering myself is, Faik, I'm curious about your decision to seek out a coach to help you with your self-exploration as opposed to a psychotherapist. Self-reflection, self-exploration, and self-awareness are what some people seek out in therapy. Okay, so that's one question, but then someone else was also asking about disabilities that follow profoundly gifted folks from ADHD to ASD. So maybe that's more for Paula, and then so maybe if I can go first, and then Paula.
Yeah, and I would say that both of us can probably contribute to answering the questions because they're related.
Yes.
And even the idea of whether those are disabilities or are disabilities every time we think they are. Sometimes they could be. So, but let me just go to Nina's question. So Nina, that's a great question. And here it is. I talk to psychologists. I talk to psychiatrists. I talk to anybody willing to talk to me. I talk to priests. At the time, it was so intense. I tried to do everything I could that was within my ability. And in fact, it came with I started with therapists and psychiatrists. Well, psychiatrists, when you talk about acute symptoms, like I'm depressed right now, I'm really feeling anxious. So they're going to refer you to somebody to give you something to sort of calm it down. But ultimately, I did not believe that they provided me with the answer for two reasons. So one of them, I honestly do not think. So psychiatry, I'm sure that they do some beneficial things. But by and large now, I'm skeptical to the point where I think of psychiatry as a pseudoscience. I do not think psychiatry is a science. It's a very powerful statement. Maybe some aspects of it can be defended, but some aspects of it, I really do not think so. Because here's the thing. When I'm going through these extremely personal and acute sort of experience that's coming directly from my personal history and from my cognitive makeup, and within 15 minutes, somebody tells me that they have a pill that's going to be able to fix me. And then, okay, I take that pill because I didn't have any other solution. And it almost kills me. And then the person says, well, you know what? There must be some other pill. Let's just try some. That's not serious. I mean, to me, in my case, that is not. I'm sure it worked for some other people, and I'm really happy for them. But to me, that was my experience. In the sense that you can't figure out a person. It took me 45 years, and I'm still working at it. 15 minutes to find a solution, or to think the solution to everything is a pill. It's just a very strange premise that does not seem to be borne out by reality. And again, It's just, this is the skeptical of me talking. Psychologists, I think they are great to talk about personal relationships, to talk about certain things, but I did not find anybody close to even bringing up the possibility of personal disintegration, and about all of these are stemming from my cognitive makeup and how that misalignment with the world, sort of grew to the point of crisis. And then what do I do now? It's just that those things just never came up. And I did see psychologists, psychiatrists for quite a while. And then I stopped because to me, it was clear that it wasn't working. So do psychologists offer things? I mean, I'm actually much more sympathetic towards psychology than I am towards psychiatry. Does it have place? Absolutely. Does it have place in this particular type of journey? I think it's going to take somebody with a very unique sort of understanding and degree of open-mindedness. If I met Paula and she was a psychologist, I think I would probably say things very differently. It just happens that Paula was aware of particular thing about spiritual emotional sensitivity. To me, that were the most relevant things, and I was able to build sort of like to build around that understanding. So that was my personal experience, and I'm only bound by that. I don't know. As I said, with other people, for other things, it probably could work differently.
So then let's go on to that question about the neurodiversity of highly gifted, and I'll want Faik to talk about this too, because he's the one who's highly gifted and I'm not. I'd like to preface that with, I think when you are a gifted person, highly gifted or not, when you have overexcitabilities, when you are possibly experiencing a disintegration, I think the background knowledge and experience of your psychotherapist or your coach is very important. You see, Faik and I don't look very much alike. I'm much older than Faik. I grew up in the United States. Faik grew up in Algeria. We both have overexcitabilities, but there are some aspects of us that are similar. And I think our overexcitabilities, I think our interest in humanity and caring for the good of others, people, plants, and animals, really make a difference. But I also think that I, as a coach, am able to share a lot of personal information with my clients. And that included my having a spirit guide, I'll just share it here, named Holly. And I opened that up to Faik. And I'm sure at first that was just a little bit unusual, even though he had a spiritual interest, but I think it opened up possibilities for Faik as well. And Faik, do you want to talk about the neurodiversity? Because, you and I have talked, the more of an outlier you are, the more chances that you're going to have other issues that, helped create this profound giftedness. So perhaps rather than seeing as a disability, these neurodiversities are abilities nourishing profound giftedness.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's not just that. I think it really relates to what I was saying earlier about the nation state. So somebody, if the goal ultimately is to create an efficient factory worker and a soldier, that's really the goal. That's what the nation state was, taking the people and then sort of use the school system to form them in this way, because that's what works best for the nation state. Things changed. I mean, things in the nation state isn't as strong as it used to be. Now it's more corporations and it's more productivity, and so there are all these kinds of issues. But then you bring in this story and you put it on top of human diversity, cognitive diversity. Because when we talk about diversity, most of the time people think about race, they think about certain things, religion, some national origin. to me, far more, and in fact, even as an instructor with students, if something that far more impacts a person really is their cognitive makeup, more than anything else. It's really more than anything else. And I think so. Look into it from the outside. Like, for example, I would speak fast. I'm intense, but that intensity will allow me. There are certain things you would need intensity to build pyramids, to go to the moon. But you have to have intensity. If we didn't have some intense people, we wouldn't have done any of those things. But if all people were intense, we would not have done those things either, because you would have somebody like, yeah, the pyramid, but then who's going to build the pyramid? It's the moon, but then who's going to sit down and work at the detail? So this diversity is what makes the world, what makes the world, what makes the world clicks. And it's very natural. So we're talking about distributions, and this is like a multi-dimensional distribution in the sense that you have different variables. So let's say memory, creativity, and so you put all of them together and you end up with some multi-dimensional distribution. And people can be, anywhere in this space. So anywhere in this space. But if we insist, and often people insist, even people like, sometimes I feel people around me, I could feel it sometimes. I have to sort of become self-conscious. Could this guy just shut up a little? Could he just calm down a little bit? Oh my God, he goes again. So what it is that what appears, what appears to us as sometimes, and again, not all the time, but sometimes as pathologies, or it's deviation from an average. But it's so the fact that it deviates from the average does not make it natural. It's all natural. It's just when we insist that what isn't, so we start confusing natural with average, we will start confusing what not being average means. Yeah, there's a lot to say about this. So, but then I think I would say that much for now.
Okay, Elizabeth.
Thank you. That was great. Okay, so the next question, just trying to see if we can catch these. Have you had the experience of people who do not have giftedness being so unable to understand you that they treat you as though you are cognitively inferior? If so, how have you dealt with this? Interesting.
Yeah. So I'll give you a perfect example. When I dropped out from college, it got nothing to do with my ability to do mathematics or to do physics or do anything. But it was a very competitive environment. And there were people who were so competitive, they want to show me as a failure. So convince themselves and convince people around. For them, it was, so what it was, again, so narrow, emotionally, spiritually, and intellectually, that's how they see the world. Mostly Dobrowski level ones. That's how they see the world. For me, it wasn't that at all. It was the handling the pressure coming from outside and the pressure coming from inside, and trying to navigate all of that and navigate the realities of, for me, just moving to a completely different continent and the very unusual circumstances. It just was a lot. So somebody may look at it as like, this guy couldn't even get it together. So he's still like, compared to some people, yes, I have quite a few things right now brewing. Some of them, if I could even one of them comes to full fruition, it could probably, by the standards of worldly achievements, would be considered a really good worldly achievement. But I'm not there yet, and I wasn't trying. That wasn't my goal, in the sense that let me do this one thing and then make sure that I become the world champion in it. But you could misjudge. Like for example, I'm trying to do, so finishing my PhD this year, starting a company, doing this, writing screenplay, doing this, doing that. So somebody would say, this guy has no focus, this guy. So they misunderstand where those things are coming from. It's not an internal drive. It's not that insatiable curiosity. And who said that I was meant to live a certain way? They put in me a concept standard I never accepted as mine. So it would be very easy for somebody to look from the outside and say, okay, this guy doesn't get his act together. But paradoxically, and funny enough, that let's say even just as a university instructor, even just one part of what I do, I actually excelled at it so well it's not only that I got by students nominated as the instructor of the year a couple of years ago. Students nominate me every year, and the school has to sort of not give it to me every year. They have to change it and give it to other people, so that I will not, so that it's the same person getting it all the time. Why am I saying this? Because there are people in the faculty who make this claim that I'm all over the place, I'm doing all these things, but they are really dedicated and focused. Now, you could be dedicated and focused. That got nothing to do with standards of output, or you just means that you're now, plus it's not a virtue and it's not a choice. It's not somebody woke up in the morning and says, well, you know, let me just do this one thing. So most people can do, usually are focused in that way anyway. So, but I would like to add one more thing. It no longer matters to me. I go to a place where those conversations are not relevant. It's just what's relevant now is just try to continue and try to build my life around my values and live the best I can. The idea of what somebody else thinks, it's just relevant, because ultimately what people do is that they take reality, they map it onto their mental landscape. Then people's mental landscape is their mental landscape, not reality in the time. So I honestly just stopped worrying about all of that.
And I'd like to follow up on that, because I think it's a great question about being misunderstood by other people. In the work I do with my clients, and I think Faik is a great example, we don't feel sorry for ourselves because of our giftedness and, oh, people don't understand us and this has happened to me and that's happened to me. Instead, we see what a great opportunity and, what a great gift we're given. And what Faik was just saying reminds me of the Mel Robbins book, the let them theory. Let them think that and let me. And I love that part of her of, they can think this and then let me, how am I going to lead my life? And one of the things that Faik and I both believe in is that in some ways when you're gifted, it could be another language, and you have to learn to speak the language of the other people you're speaking with. So if, Faik has helped our granddaughter who's 12 learn some math. Well, here's somebody who teaches college level math. He's able to speak to Lucy as well. So I think that when you're gifted, you need to be careful not to carry it around as a badge of honor. Well, no one else can understand me. I think that's our problem when other people can't understand what we're saying. If they don't understand that our lives are intense, or how can Faik have the kind of multipotentiality that he has, that's just different. They don't understand that. But I think we need to be able to, when we're a teacher or when we're a friend or something, come down to the language of the other people. I think it's part of being a part of humanity.
Absolutely. And empathy. And that's where the emotional sensitivity and spiritual sensitivity come. And ultimately to understand, it's not like I was in this fetus universe and I won a contest and I got rewarded. I was born this way, and it's just how it is. My wiring is different than the next person's wiring, and different than next. Each one of us is unique. For us, we are talking today about being unique in this particular way, but there are other being unique in all kinds of ways. But today, just this particular way. And part of it is exactly that, is being so that emotional sensitivity and spiritual sensitivity that allow us to be able to see people. Sometimes it's extremely hard because you're able to see people, but you don't feel that people necessarily see you. And sometimes it's so this leads me to Aaron's question. So Aaron says, I'm so happy to hear someone else talk about neurodiversity. Oh, thank you, Aaron. And then I think this is so this just was about a comment. But then Lynn says, Faik, thank you. I was wondering if loneliness is an issue. Loneliness is an intense issue. I woke up this morning. I'll tell you what, give you a typical. I'm going to be very honest about this. Woke up this morning and woke up and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to wake up now, step out of bed and go back to that planet. That same planet from yesterday and from the day before. I have to go back and live in that planet that I still don't understand. I don't understand it today that I understood it a year ago. I understand myself better, and I'm accepting of myself better. It is, I'll tell you where the loneliness comes from. It comes from, but it's not that, so again, it's not loneliness, so it depends on the day. There are days where I feel extremely, extremely happy. It doesn't mean loneliness, not necessarily happy, but I feel connected, like, but also having somebody like Paula. Without having somebody like Paula and a few other friends, it would have been much, much harder. But I was lucky enough that I have the personality type that I'm open, so that helps. But the paradox is that you long for deep, meaningful connections. It's how it is. It's part of the cognitive makeup. But there aren't things like that to have because everybody pretty much gets caught up in their own life and their own details. Sometimes you crave like intellectual conversations, emotional connections, and it's sometimes it's just extremely hard. And particularly, so for me, like I give you something that are, like, for example, somebody would say, okay, why don't you just go up, use dating apps and all of these things? I find it to be an extremely sort of harsh landscape. It's a very unforgiving, where I feel people just using people for their own gratification. It's like, what's best for me, next person, then the whole logic of it doesn't make sense. And there are times I sit down, I'm reading Alexander Hamilton's biography, and I said to myself, I would have loved to have coffee with Alexander Hamilton. Whether he would be interested in having coffee with me is a different story. But just sit down with that guy and have a conversation. I think would actually be great friends. So sometimes you feel some kindred spirit. So Paula absolutely is a kindred spirit to me. But other people are fictitious character. And sometimes I have this feeling then probably the few people that I could really, really, really connect with and deal with and work with, and we would understand, and probably they're dead. Some one of them lived in another country.
That would be a good book. That would be a good book you could write, Faik.
Yeah,
Some
exactly.
of my best friends are dead.
Yeah, like, oh, Leonardo da Vinci is such a good guy. Yeah, too bad he was dead 500 years ago. So it is, but here is the thing. Loneliness is a very fundamental thing to all people. All people feel lonely for all kinds of reasons. So to me, all I can tell you is why I think sometimes I feel lonely. I can tell you that. But I'm sure people, I mean, everybody seems to feel lonely. Everybody seems to feel alienated and sad and all of that. But I can tell you about my part. And sometimes, as I said, sometimes you have to wake up and you would have to, it reminds you that you have to align yourself and all of that. But the world doesn't owe anybody, doesn't owe us anything. It was there for 5 billion years before any of us were born. So we have to make it, we are the ones who have to adapt, I guess.
And that's some of the kind of work we've been doing together also, having to do with relationships. And Faik is single. If any of you are interested in Faik, you need to come through me first. But
that's cute.
We have had these kind of conversations about loneliness, and it isn't just people who are single or, who are profoundly gifted who are lonely.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's 1 o'clock and people may need to start to get going, but if you want to continue, is at least one other question here.
Faik, do you have time to continue?
Yeah.
Okay.
I probably would have about another half an hour before I go to my next meeting.
I'm having fun. So
okay, yeah. So Paula, can you talk a bit about clients who exist at the intersection between giftedness and serious developmental trauma and how that compounds their experience, how it intersects with traits that might be perceived as neurodivergent?
So if I have a client who has experienced significant trauma, I want to know whether or not they have a psychotherapist in addition to me, because, I would be really concerned if the suicidal ideation is not because of the giftedness and existential depression that people go through, but if there is some kind of healing work that still needs to take place that I haven't had the training in. And so I do have clients who have both a therapist and me as a coach. And what I do with that then is we start talking about the overexcitabilities. I start from wherever that client is. So, you know, what we've talked about, this is Faik's journey. It doesn't mean it would be your journey with me. Whatever rises to the surface as the most important thing is what I would want to work with a client who's had childhood trauma. And I would really, there are some books that I really love. I actually have one here that I love. This one, Inner Excellence. This one is the one that the receiver from the Eagles was seen reading this book in the last few weeks, and it has made this book now be a #1 on Amazon. But the talk about the excellence coming, as Faik's been talking about, from within us, and the kind of courage that we need, the kind of humanity that we feel, the love that we can express for ourselves and others. And so I would want to take a client who's experienced trauma back to a place where they do have love, they do have courage, that these feelings for themselves, if that has been robbed of them. But I think it's really important that they have someone else that they're working with as well.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted everybody to know the speakers will see all of your comments, even if I'm not going to read all of them here. And if you have any other questions, please put them into the Q&A, which again is in the activities section, lower right-hand corner, triangle, square, circle. Getting lots of great feedback here. And Paula, there was one other question about qualifications to become a coach for gifted individuals.
Oh, gosh, that's a good question, because I know that there are some people who have certificates in coaching, and I think mine was, 40 years of experience of working as an educator, running a center for gifted education at a university. But I could imagine someone who has been a parent of a gifted child, or who has been a teacher of gifted children, or has spent their life as a gifted person. But it really depends upon the person. This is like the best thing I've ever done. I can't imagine ever stopping, because I love it so much. And if you don't have a background in education, or you don't have, I don't know, a degree as a therapist or something, it might be a good idea to go somewhere to get a certificate in coaching, just so you can practice the experience, have those kinds of experiences with gifted people. I don't know. What do you think, Faik?
Yeah. Well, I totally agree.
I think Faik would be amazing. And I have actually brought Faik along on some of my sessions with teenagers, who I want them to realize that they need to take control of their ADHD. It doesn't matter how much mom and dad want them to, pay attention in class or complete their assignments. And, I just think Faik would be an amazing coach for other gifted people.
I mean, yeah, it really was a pleasure meeting some of Paula's young clients, and even just having conversations with them. And there is one, actually, I became really good friends. He's 9 years old. He just bought his first telescope and set it up, and he's probably the one with the most pronounced multipotentiality, and just being able to just be there and be there in any way we can. I think it's extremely empowering to them and to us as well. It just makes us feel of use, and not just feel of use. And it could make a huge difference. I mean, a guide, and it could make a huge and absolute difference. It's as I was saying, it could be a difference between life and death. And in fact, if you look, I mean, mythology, Campbell, and you see, the hero with 1,000 faces, and there's always an ingredient in a story. So there is the person going through that stories, and they call it the journey, the hero's journey, whatever you call it, or you call it Bouhrik, disintegration, positive, whatever you call it. There is always a guide. There is always a guide in the sense that somebody who has an understanding, empathy, and wisdom to allow that person to connect a part of them that becomes sort of like the foundation for the whole thing. Of course, they cannot walk that journey for you. It's too much of a personal thing. But I absolutely believe that having that kind of support and very critical form of compassion is extremely critical. It could make all the difference. So if somebody asked the question, a favorite book by Bouhrik, Kristen? Yeah, so Positive Disintegration, I think, is a great book. I think he wrote it in the early 60s. Most of the books they can find in English, in my experience, I think are about people like writing about Bouhrik and his work. So, but there are some books that exist in translation, and this is one of them. That's what I would recommend. So,
and I'm reading one now that's just been republished, and it's by Bouhrik, and it's about personality, the development of the personality, and I'm finding that to be very interesting as well.
Yeah, and Lynn also asks, can you talk about your spiritual guide? Paula, you can answer that question.
Yes. So I found myself in a place, 1998, just after the suicide of my brother, just short of his 50th birthday. And I felt like I was held together by threads. And if at any moment any of those threads were going to fray, that I might lose myself in this world. I didn't know what was going to happen to me, and it was pretty terrifying. And I started seeing a lot of synchronicities happening, and they were too powerful to ignore. And I just started doing some guided writing, and during that guided writing, I would write things that I don't know where they came from, because they weren't things that I was writing myself. Some people would say it was my higher self, whatever. But I found I had this guide named Holly, and Holly would tell me things, help lead my life in just an amazing way. And we even shared a blog post for a year on WordPress that was very meaningful to me. And prior to COVID, Holly told me to stop cutting my hair and to take the weave I'd been doing of blondes and beiges and do a reweave with white woven through. And I didn't know why, but I went ahead and did it. And it was particularly funny during COVID, because when the other women, we live near in Los Angeles, had these white yarmulkes on their heads because they weren't able to get their hair done anymore and their white grew out. I was all white, and I realized then what Holly was encouraging me to do, and the number of people that she told me were going to die from COVID in the United States was so mind-boggling. When I would share it with other people, they wouldn't believe it. But when I shared it with Faik, he believed it. And I've been able to share this technique with Faik as well, of guided writing. And I don't know what you're interested in sharing about that. I'm not going to share your stories, Faik, but it's pretty profound personally and professionally what listening to the universe can teach us.
It really is. I mean, if Paula told me this years ago, when we first met, I was like, okay, Paula, this is just a little bit new agey for me. Just leave me alone. But what it is that, so I'm an extremely visual person, and I absolutely believe that intuition is a very, very powerful form of knowledge. There is something, and I think there is some kind of imbalance in the West now, particularly with the advent of the Enlightenment. I think that the whole term of to me, the whole idea of Enlightenment and Dark Ages is more mythology really than history. But I just, the overemphasis on logic is a little bit too much. And I actually believe that people who really made discoveries in science, the prime example is Einstein, is to his thought experiments. And so now people say, well, science physics sort of lost enough touch with reality, or it's become so far removed from daily experience that those thought experiments will probably not be a very useful tool. And just recently, a colleague of mine and I, we published a paper. And so this paper, it really was, to me, it was started with this sort of guided meditation. And just imagined myself a little bit longer. So there's this famous Einstein experiment. And I just added to it in the sense that, okay, before it ends, because it was all about gravity and how there's something called the equivalence principle. So, and I felt that there was a solution. There's more to that story if we just repeat that experiment or continue it, but inside of an electric field. So we would have charged particles moving in an electric field, but the elevator that's charged. And it's just really remarkable how very quickly, so that allowed us to write an equation, so that the equation was very clear. It's inspired, so it's more about the electromagnetic field, but it actually resembles Einstein's theory, Einstein's equation. So Einstein's, just for a summary, so you have two classical theories. You have electromagnetic theory of Maxwell, you have Einstein's theory. They describe these forces in very, very fundamentally different ways. And then quantum physics comes in, it succeeds at making Maxwell's theory quantum, but it completely fails with Einstein's general theory of relativity. It has been about now 100 years that people have been sort of reconciling these two, either the classical with quantum. That problem has zero solutions in the sense that people are not any close today than they were before. And I'm not claiming that they have solved the problem, but what they claim is that by just taking that approach is purely intuitive, and it extends actually what Einstein did initially. We were able to predict, so not only write an equation and solve it and show that equation actually shows you Coulomb's law and all these classical results without having to invoke the concept of electric field. But very strangely, it predicts a phenomenon that we call time fitching. It looks like if you bring in two charges, you place them in the same place in an electric field, but time runs differently for each charge based on how much charge it has. So this effect does not exist in either Maxwell's theory or quantum electrodynamics, which is the quantum version, because those two theories conceptualize space-time as sort of a structure, and on top of it you add the electromagnetic field. For us, we just took actually, based on that thought experiment, you could think of it as very similar way in the sense that electromagnetic field and space-time are two manifestations of the same thing. So, and then we were able to, so we just published that, and we're just waiting actually to hear back. And it predicts something very concrete. So the beautiful thing is that, well, it's a falsifiable theory. It's either true or it isn't. So we are not going to drag for another 50 years trying to amend it and fix it. And like I feel has been done with string theory and quantum loop gravity and all those sort of solutions, which I think beautiful math, but whether they say something about the physical universe is a different story. But why I'm saying all of this, what Paula says, how imagination, intuition, spirituality comes in, you actually use it as a tool to try to visualize something and try to imagine something and try to see a problem in a way that you would not be. I mean, if people were, it has been 80 years, that problem would have been solved by now. But it hasn't. It's not only it hasn't been solved, it doesn't seem like people have any idea on how to solve it. And again, I'm not claiming that this is a complete solution, but it's a hint of a solution that there are some profound connections that people need to explore a little bit more. But yeah, so we'll find out more about that. But that directly relates or connects the spiritual with the intellectual that Paul was talking about.
So I need to show you how a coach doesn't need to be as profoundly gifted as their client, because a lot of what Faik just said to you, I don't really even understand, but I'm excited about it. And I have led Faik to a way of understanding how to use his intuition, how to use his amazing visual spatial skills, to know in other ways that we're not taught to know in school.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah.
I think that's actually a perfect place to bring our conversation to a close. Thank you both so much. I think that's very insightful, very interesting, bringing together so many different aspects, physics and spirituality and everything. And thank you to everyone who stayed on to this point.
And thank you for the great questions. You know, that I think was the thing we were really hoping for, is to be able to engage the people who were listening. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for everybody who participated and who joined us. And somebody said, thanking us for the choosing to be vulnerable. Absolutely. What if we are to be truthful and authentic, and somebody's to benefit from anything we say? Hopefully, it's the only way to do it. So it's a choice that we choose very, very, very intentionally. And we're I'm very, very glad that we are able to contribute in any way. I just want to add one more thing. So Elizabeth, people, for your Paula, if anybody has any more questions or follow-ups, would like to connect with me, please feel free to like Paula said, she's the gateway. So go through Paula.
Yes, and if someone wants to schedule an appointment with Paula, they can go to the Summit Center website, summitcenter.us, and she's available through there.